Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Clare Thomas-Pino, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about applying for an HHRF grant, the vital steps to success. I've been working with HHRF since 2004 as a grant reviewer and member of the Scientific Advisory Committee. My background is in psychology and animal behaviour, and I started that in the United Kingdom and followed it on with a developmental, social and health psychology master's study. And then I came back to the US, where I'd lived for a period of time as a young child, to complete an interdisciplinary PhD, which focused on counsellor education masters and looking at nature-based and animal-assisted interventions in anthrozoology. My doctoral dissertation focused on both the impact of equine human interaction on horses and people through the lens of attachment theory. I've done a lot of work in nature-based and animal-assisted interventions for the last 18 years. And I've also, in addition to working with HHRF, been a member of the EFMA board of directors for what was then NARA and has now become PATH International. I completed 2 of the annotated bibliographies on equine assisted services in the mid to late 2000s. I've worked with animals, particularly horses, for more than 40 years, and I've developed and taught courses in the state of Maine in the United States and worked on several research projects related to all sorts of animals' behavior, anthrozoology and animal assisted interventions. I've taught in psychology, counsellor education, animal science and rehabilitation services for 4 different universities, or 5 different universities in Maine. And I've developed several courses, including mind-body connection, medical issues for mental health counsellors, livestock and companion animal behaviour and equine nutrition, and then 5 graduate courses in green care, animal assisted interventions in anthrozoology, for the University of Southern Maine's online professional development program, targeted at master's level or above. I've recently, in the last couple of months, returned back to my homeland in the United Kingdom, and I'm a lecturer and program manager of the undergraduate program in human animal interactions at Hartpury University. I'm really enjoying not having snow in the wintertime. So today, I want to start with looking at the horse and emphasizing the importance of equine well-being that we at HHRF really place on any of the work that we support. So this is absolutely vitally important to us. I also want to familiarize you with the HHRF grant application process, something I see as vital, as since 2004, I've been watching and reviewing grant proposals as they come in, seeing the caliber change and thankfully rise. But I've also seen a great number of people who have great ideas, but simply lack the understanding that they need to put them into the proposal in a certain way to ensure that we, as grant reviewers, will actually understand what they're trying to do. And I want you, through that process, to understand a little bit more about our scientific advisory review process and how we evaluate grants at HHRF. So we're going to start with the horse, which to me is where we really need to start, as in all this work, with basically incorporating horses into the work we do. And it's absolutely vital that we put their well-being and suitability as paramount in anything that we think about. So the highest good are guidelines for humans from the horse's perspective. Horses are sentient beings. They're very aware of, sensitive to, and affected by the environment that they're in. This also includes the behaviors and emotional state of others in their present. So others can mean other horses, can mean other people, can mean other animals. It's really important that we are aware of what's going on in their presence. When horses are well managed and cared for with consideration and empathy, they build resilience to more effectively cope with the inevitable stresses of life. It's important that we build up that resilience in our horses. Otherwise, they will burn out, or their behaviours will change, and they will become dangerous and unsuitable, not only for the work that we do, but possibly for other people beyond that work. So we really need to protect our horses and optimally manage and be aware of their physical, mental, and emotional health to be able to make them able to cope with the work that we are trying to do with them. It's absolutely vital that we choose horses that already have a propensity and an enjoyment in working with and engaging with people, and that we protect that, because the work that we do can sometimes be very stressful. So here is a document that you could actually place and put up as a poster in your building. As a horse working in equine services, I require people who, so we got their care and are committed to my mental and physical well-being through understanding kindness, empathy, and professional care, respect individual abilities, character traits, and limitations. Every one of us has limitations as well as abilities. And it's absolutely vital that we recognize the individuality of the horses we're working with. And this is really important because without accepting and understanding and paying attention, we're not really able to understand when our horses are having an issue and are in distress and need our help, or need to be able to relax and not participate in a session. So we need to continually assess that physical and emotional capacity. We need to work with the horses in a calm and consistent manner and prepare them for anything that we expect them to do. We also need to make sure that all their basic needs are met, and that when it's time for them to retire, that we need to make sure that there's a suitable place for that to happen. So we've thought about the horse, and we always need to put the horse's well-being at the forefront of everything we do. We also now want to really focus on how do we at HHRF expect your proposals to look? What do we expect you to have thought about? So here we have our 2022 HHRF grant, which again is going to be for $50,000. And it's for research investigating the interaction of horses with humans who've experienced trauma and a preference given to underserved populations. These are the actual documents that we will anticipate you completing. And we're very clear about the format in which we expect these to be completed. So they must be submitted in electronic format. They must be in Word format on 8.5 to 11-inch paper with pages numbered, double-spaced with a 1-inch margin and a 12-point font size with a preference to Times New Roman, Arial, and Calibri. And there's also a page and word limit that we expect you to adhere to. So your completed packet is going to have all of these components, which I'm going to go through. So, got in big friendly letters here, follow the guidelines. One of the biggest reasons for a proposal not being funded is that the guidelines were not followed. And that can be as simple as word and page limits, or as complex as not following the specific aspects that we are looking at. We don't want lots of extra information. We don't want 50 pages. The grant reviewers, all of us have other roles that we play in life. We certainly can't be there for thousands of hours trying to wade through lots and lots of documents. It's important that you accurately adhere to our guidelines. So the cover page, what's on your cover page? We want to know the title of your project and the date that you're submitting. We want to know who the PI is and their title, so the principal investigator. We also want to know the contact person. That may not be the same as the PI. And that is the person that's going to receive all the letters and notification. It must be a physical address, and if it's different, a mailing address, a telephone number, website, other social media accounts, and an email address. And then we want to know if you've applied to HHRF before and if you've been successful. As grant reviewers, most of us put helpful comments into our reviews. So we hope that you will go away with those helpful comments and refine your application and maybe even apply again, as many of them have great concepts. They're just lacking in one or two areas. Then we want to know what your primary focus area for that investigation is. So are you looking at mental health? Are you looking at physical health? Are you looking at the horse primarily, or are you looking at the individual person, and are there any other aspects that you happen to be looking at? Then we want a brief description of the project in lay language. So this is so that a young person would actually be able to read and understand this. This is a very simple and short description of your project. We also want to know if you're going to collaborate with anybody else or anybody's going to consult with you on this project. So it may be that there are other organizations. If you happen to be at a university, you likely will be collaborating with an equine establishment. This is where your attachments for your proposal come in, as the letters of support from these individuals or letters of collaboration need to be attached to your application. We also want to know if you have any other letters or other agreements that you are working in for people you're working with. And then for this particular project, we're asking whether you're working with an underserved population. And if yes, please describe who that underserved population and how they are underserved. Then we come into the scientific part of your project. We would like to see a 400-word or less scientific abstract. So this is where you can actually use all those complex terms, but please make sure that you define them if they are things that are a little bit different, or you might have applied them in a slightly different way. Those of us who are reviewing your grant proposals generally are very aware of the field and the terminology, but it's still really important to note that everybody uses different words, and in each different country, we often use different terms for different things. We then want you to think about the need and the justification. This is a very important area for us. We want to know what the purpose and your research question are, and what conceptual framework you have for your project. It's really vital that you show us how your project impacts the wider equine assisted services field, as well as the narrow population that you may be evaluating. And here's where we really think that it's important that you have some pilot research. We want to see that you've actually tested your methodology on a population, and if necessary, that you've refined it to make sure that the work that you're doing can actually answer the question that you are delving into. So here's your research narrative. We want to see your research design and methodology in detail. We want to make sure that your methodology actually answers the question of your project. And here is something that I share with my undergraduate and graduate students, which is, I want to see a methodology that is concise, so not using a lot of words, but that very clearly states exactly what is being done in a way that another person reading it can come along and replicate it. So check that your research design and methodology is replicable. Check that it actually has the ability to answer your research question. I'm saying that really slowly and clearly because that is one of the biggest areas where many of the proposals fall down. The research design and methodology is not adequate to be able to answer the question of the project, or it's too complicated and too convoluted such that any results that arise will not actually be able to be generalized. So it's really important that you focus on this. Then we want you to think about your participation selection and the number of participants. And again, this is where your pilot study comes into play, that you know what number of participants you actually need to have in your study in order for your results to be able to be generalized. And here we need to think about inclusion and exclusion criteria, which can impact your timeline. So the more that you refine the participant selection, the harder it's going to be able to find participants, but the more likely it is that you're actually able to ask the question and perhaps answer it successfully. So you're walking a fine line, but bear in mind that participant selection can take a very long time in terms of recruitment. I also want you to describe your data collection and analysis methods so that we know that you're able to handle the information that's coming in and how you're going to process that so that you have some results. If your statistics is not your greatest asset, make sure that you get a statistician on board. That's something that we see an awful lot of nowadays, and we're very pleased to see. Some people are not that great at statistical analysis, so it's important that they work with someone who is. And if you're studying a specific intervention, a specific way of working with the horse, it's absolutely vital that you describe that in detail, as we would like to look at programs that have enough detail that they could actually manualize the intervention so that other people can use it. And then if you're using different outcomes and you're looking at different outcomes, you need to list them and describe how and why they'll answer your research question. And sometimes here it could be useful to really specify which outcome measures you're using, which questionnaires you happen to be working with, and show that they are validated. Again, it's something that we look for. Your literature review needs to be really clear in how your proposal and your proposed project fits in with the existing literature and fills a gap that exists there. Be very aware that those of us who are looking at and reviewing your proposals have a fairly good understanding of the literature that exists out there on the field. So don't say, oh, there's a huge gap here and nothing exists. I'd much rather see you place in an obscure article that I probably know about, but say, this is great, touches on the field, but does not have the capacity to be able to be generalized, or that it's of poor quality or has a very small sample size, which is very common in this field. So don't try and bluff us, is what I'm trying to say. I want to make sure that you really understand how important it is that you are aware that those of us who are reviewing your projects have a very good understanding of the field and where it's at, and the directions that would be really helpful, and the directions and areas that there are really missing within our field, and they are huge. Then we come on to the funding part, the budget. $50,000 is not a lot of money, but to us at HHRF, it is. So it's really important that you're very clear and provide an itemized budget and a narrative justification. So it's not enough just to put figures there. We need you to be very clear in words about how and why each aspect, each amount of money is placed there. So you need to justify again each penny that you are putting into your budget. And here we've got things like personnel. So that's where you can put that statistician as well as the principal investigator and any research assistants that you have. Aspects of permanent equipment, consumable supplies, any consultants that you're going to work with, any travel. So if you have, for example, are going to travel for a work group. And again, COVID-19 has been a really good leveler on that aspect, as many of us have realized that we don't actually need to travel anywhere, that a Zoom meeting is more than good enough. So research participants, are there any related expenses to those? Are you going to provide them with a gas card to be able to get to a centre? Thinking about the horse expenses, they must be related directly to the research question and methodology. We're not going to cover all the care and upkeep for the horses for an entire year. So it's really important that you understand that up front. And then you really want to put that justification, any further information that we need beyond those 7 other sections. Other income sources and anticipated funding. So if you're a university, if you've got other funding from other sources, you need to detail it there so we know where our funding is coming in and what other funders you have to make sure that this project will actually go ahead. Your proposed timeline is a really vital aspect. Again, it's something that recruitment stage often takes a lot longer than anybody anticipates. I think many of us think, oh, we get lots and lots of potential participants in this type of study. It's really interesting. We may do, but many of them may be unsuitable and may not meet our inclusion and exclusion criteria. It does not mean that we're going to loosen those, but it does mean that we need to be very aware of how we budget our time and how we think about recruiting our participants. We have to be quite creative. We also want to think about how much time it realistically is going to take to write up at the end. And then you want to think about what you're going to do beyond that, which we'll talk about in a moment on the next slide. We also want that really detailed biographic sketch of the principal investigator. And we'd also like information for anybody else who's going to be working on the project. This is for a multitude of reasons, but we want to make sure that your education, that your research and professional experience really backs up and provides you with a lot of support for the work that you're going to be doing. So we want to know who you're working with at the moment and whether you're going to have institutional support for this particular project. We also want to look at any publications that anybody working on the project has done, particularly during the last 3 years, and you can have those that are a little bit older than that as well. So we want you to think about the safety and quality standards. We started with talking about how valuable the horses are and how absolutely vital it is that their well-being comes as paramount in anything that you're doing. So you need to talk about who is going to be directly involved with working with the horses and what their education level, what certificates they have, what certifying bodies they work with, and what standards they adhere to. This is absolutely vital and can be a reason, again, why your proposal is not awarded with the grant. We also want to have a little bit of understanding of the site standards in which the human-equine interaction is going to take place to make sure that the space that this happens has the necessary requirements and really adheres to ethical and safety standards. And then for COVID-19, we want to make sure that everybody is adhering to the health guidelines, particularly as many of our participants may fall into a vulnerable population. Then we move on to compliance with government requirements. So we want to make sure that you have gone through or at least have a proposal in place for your IRB and IACUC. So again, this is a reason that you may want to work with and through a university, as they often have their own IRB and IACUC. And it may be that you're not able to submit that until you have grant approval, but you want to have thought about that and be ready to do that and clearly state that in your application. The next section may look small, but is really absolutely one of the most vital aspects, your plans to publish. And this reflects back on that biographic sketch of the PI. We want to make sure that you have the understanding and the experience of how and where to publish the material. We want to make sure it gets out into the academic community. And we also want to make sure that it feeds back to providers within the field. So it's absolutely vital that you're very, very clear about all the ways in which the information that you gather from your study is going to go out into both the academic and the public. And then finally, you've got your attachments. And here we clearly state only cited references, including a glossary of definitions for abbreviations, acronyms, and technical terminology, letters from collaborators, a copy of IRB and IACUC applications, and your bibliographic citations, so your reference list for that all-important literature review. And here I'm not going to read, but I want to make sure that you read the research grant conditions of the award. It is absolutely vital, and I know I keep using that word, that you very clearly read through and understand the implications of all of these 14 different conditions before you sign your name at the bottom, because those will be adhered to if you are lucky enough to get through the process and be awarded the grant. So when I'm evaluating, or anyone else on the SRC is evaluating your proposal, we are looking at those same sections. We're looking at whether you've clearly expressed a need justification for your project. And not only do we understand, but that really makes sense for the field and for that particular award that you're applying for. We want to know that you clearly stated your purpose or question to address, and that you've included your conceptual framework and explained the broad significance to equine assisted services and the implications that your project, if successful, will bring to our field. We want to see the results of relevant pilot research. It's really important for us to see that and see how you have modified things if they haven't quite gone to plan. All of us come up with very interesting methodologies, which we think are going to be very effective. And sometimes we need to tweak them slightly. We want to make sure that you've done that tweaking prior to applying to us. We also want to make sure that that research design and methodology really can answer your research question. I think this field is not alone in having a lot of questions, but not a lot of methodology to be able to always adequately answer them. And we really need to make sure that you have done that. In terms of your participant selection, we want to make sure that they're actually going to answer your research question, that they fit in with your design and your methodology, and that you clearly stated inclusion and exclusion criteria, because there will be some. We want to make sure that your data collection and analysis are appropriate, again, to that research question, your design and your purpose. And we want to make sure that you've got a clear, comprehensive, realistic and cost-effective budget. Again, it's not a lot of money. We need to make sure that you really can carry out the whole of this research study with the funding that you have. And you need to very clearly state where alternative funding is coming from if that 50,000 is not sufficient to cover everything you need for this project. And we want you to make sure that you do justify in words each of the figures that you put into that budget. We want to make sure your time frame for completion is realistic. When I first started with HHRF, our time frame was stated to be a year. It is now extended a little bit beyond that, as we've all become very aware that a year is not a very long time in order for a project like this to be carried out. So it's important that not only do you adhere to our guidelines, but you're also very realistic about your particular project. We then really scrutinize that biographic sketch and all the information you have provided us on any people you're collaborating or working with on this project. We want to make sure they're competent. We want to make sure they have the experience and the credentials in human equine research, because we want to make sure that you're actually able to publish the results of your project in a peer-reviewed journal, not just any journal, a peer-reviewed one. And then we really want to make sure that you have institutional support and the safety and the facility and environment that you're going to be carrying out all of this study to ensure the project goes ahead with minimal risk. Horses are a risky animal. The number of risk assessments that need to be done with them are vast. So it's really vital that we make sure that you minimize that by ensuring that the facility and environment in which you're carrying out your work is going to be not only adequate, but have lots of support to ensure that this project is successful. And then we want to make sure that you've had that IRB and IACUC through likely a university, sometimes an alternative source, to ensure that you're adhering to human research and animal welfare standards. And again, that we have clear and realistic plans from you for you to be able to publish, again, in that peer-reviewed journal and beyond. So remember that other aspect. It's really, really important. Nowadays, many of us in institutions have to ensure that we're not only publishing information to academics, but that we're also making sure it's available to lay people and practitioners. So, do you have any questions for me? This is where I'm very hopeful that you do. And I am very grateful that you've listened to me today. And I really hope that you will support HHRF in our mission to do good for human-animal interactions, particularly equine assisted services.